Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lawrence County Museum. We're so glad that you're here. I just want to tell you about a few things that are happening at the museum, and we've got something special that we're going to do before Durant gives his lecture. But if you're a genealogy fan, then there's a genealogy meeting this Thursday right here. Just come on right back here where you are, same seat, and that starts at 7 o'clock. It's a show and tell, and then if you haven't been to the museum recently, we have a Black History exhibit on display right now. It's a traveling exhibit from the State Museum called the 521 All-Stars, and it's about a black baseball league here in South Carolina. It's really a neat exhibit, and there's popcorn at the concession stand, so come just for the popcorn. It's really great. And then I want to invite you ladies to our Women's History event on March the 7th called Circle of Strength, where we'll have some Native artists here doing some Q&A and some talk and some history lessons and a drum circle. So it's really a neat experience. And then on March 14th, we're having a community art show. If you know Jim Brinson, his art is going to be on display. Barbara's is going to be here as well, and his students that he teaches a class right here at the museum. And we also are having a book signing on March the 21st. Peggy Shakola wrote a book about the Lawrence County Museum to celebrate our 20 years here in Lawrence, and we're excited about that. And all of you look like you're runners, right? So we have a we have a 5K coming up on April the 25th. It's a glow run at night, a fundraiser for the museum. So if you're a runner or a walker or know someone who is, we'd love to have you come and join us. So tonight we have Durant back for his monthly Revolutionary War talk, and as you know, he's doing a series of 10 battles in 10 months, and tonight is about the fall of Charleston. But before he starts talking about that, we'd like for Tom Holtz to come up, we've got something special that we're going to do, and I'm going to let Durant introduce him and tell about this partnership that we have with the museum and the neat things that we've been able to do. Come on over here so everybody at home can see you on that camera.
Give him the mic. So I'd like to introduce Tom Holtz. Tom is a member of the Artist Preservation Group. And this is a group of artists and art lovers who buy, create, and sell art, and they use the profits from that for worthy causes. And we're so honored to be considered a worthy cause. And we really appreciate the support that the Artist Preservation Group has given us. And with that, I'd like to, have Tom talk about a contribution from Tom and the Artist Preservation Group to the museum, and we'll go over that at this time.
Thank you, Durant. This particular figurine is an original sculpture by retired Marine Sergeant Major Michael Stelzel. And he sculpted this, cast it in resin, and then painted it. And he thought it would be a good idea to donate it to the Lawrence County Museum as part of your exhibit. So Mike is a Marine Corps veteran, Vietnam, Grenada, and Lebanon. That's where he served in combat. So, and Sergeant Major, so he's good. And the figure that he created represents Stephen Cumbo. Stephen Cumbo was a South Carolina militiaman who served in Savannah, served in the Siege of Charleston, served in Samuel Hammond's Dragoon Regiment in South Carolina, served in the Cherokee War with Pickens, and served at Utah Springs. So he's quite a storied, and we believe he was mixed race. His history goes back to Portuguese slavers brought his family over from Africa. But over time, they intermarried and mixed race and so on. But Stephen Cumbo was probably a mulatto.
Well, we are honored to have a representation of Stephen Cumbo. And he was a free black man. And again, may have been mixed race, But he fought in all the significant battles throughout South Carolina, including the Cherokee War of 1776. He was with Samuel Hammond when Samuel Hammond started his independent command, an independent regiment. And these were top-of-the-line men who fought with Samuel Hammond. Samuel Hammond fought right here at Hammond's Old Store. Stephen Cumbo fought with Samuel Hammond. So I would say chances are very likely that Stephen Cumbo fought right here in Lawrence County with Samuel Hammond at the Battle of Hammond's Old Store. So there's a definite, strong backcountry 96 Lawrence County connection with Stephen Cumbo. And we thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And the figure will be up if you'd like to look at it and discuss it after Durant's presentation. We'll be around. Thank you.
We're going to take a picture, but I also want to say, Tom, that the Artist Preservation Group also made a sizable donation to the museum that helped us acquire a musket that Durant can tell you all about. And so that is going to be on display when we open the exhibit on June the 28th, along with some other authentic Revolutionary War artifacts that we're very proud of. And the Artist Preservation Group made that possible as a donation to the museum for us to purchase those and have them on display. So we're very grateful to this group. And then this is the icing on the cake, and we're super excited about that. And I need you gentlemen to smile at the pretty girl, and let's take a picture, okay?
I've got to tell you, I'm excited about Stephen Cumbo. I really am. So, and Connie, I will tell you, I'm going to kind of switch around with you right at the beginning here. And we're going to talk tonight about, you know, the worst defeat in the entire Revolutionary War for the American forces, and that was the fall of Charleston. And Connie, one other thing I'm probably going to need as well is a pointer. I didn't realize that my laser pointer wouldn't work here. When Savannah fell on December the 30th of 1778, that was a very significant occurrence. And the fall of Savannah, thank you so much. Boy, Connie does everything. The fall of Savannah is definitely in the top 10 most important battles of the American Revolution, and it's right next to the fall of Charleston. So now the British have a toehold in the South. And, you know, December the 30th, that's the very first part of 1779. And the Loyalist forces now are very invigorated. And a fellow from the backcountry named John Boyd was a Loyalist colonel. And he arrived in the backcountry and he started collecting like-minded Loyalist militiamen who had been laying low, who had signed oaths of association saying that they were going to be a patriot. Now, there was nothing going on for this 2-year period after the Cherokee War of 1776. So they were getting along and everything. But when John Boyd comes through, when Savannah has fallen, thousands of British troops now in Savannah, John Boyd comes through the backcountry, and Andrew Pickens starts chasing him, and they have a battle at Kettle Creek in February of 1779, and Andrew Pickens with 350 men defeats John Boyd with 600 men, and it's a big victory, and half of John Boyd's force is killed or captured. They leave, they go down, they eventually meet up with regular British forces at Briar Creek, and there's another battle at Briar Creek, which is halfway between Augusta and Savannah, and that was a terrible Patriot loss. Poor management, poor battle strategy at Briar Creek. So now, the British in Savannah getting stronger and stronger. They launched raids into Port Royal and Beaufort. They tried to attack Charleston, and there's a battle at the Stono River in fall of 1779. French forces and Continentals and militia from the back country of South Carolina, this fellow right here, Stephen Cumbo, is the second siege of Savannah, where the Patriot forces attacked the Spring Hill Redoubt in Savannah, which they should have been able to overrun, except that the night before the battle, 2 deserters went to the British and told them exactly what the plan was going to be. So now the Spring Hill Redoubt was reinforced, and it was a slaughter. It was the bloodiest hour in the American Revolution at the Second Siege of Savannah. So that was in September. All this time, the British High Command realized that they were getting nowhere fighting up north. It was a stalemate in the north. Battle of Monmouth, June 1778, 6 months before Savannah Falls. That was the last major battle in the north. And after that was a stalemate. And so Henry Clinton, who was the commander of the British forces, he wanted to establish a southern base, southern campaign, Savannah Falls. It took 13 months to gather a fleet of transport ships, troop ships, and warships to come down to Savannah with a major offensive force to conquer the South. And in January of 1780, January 1780, they send this armada, 90 troop ships and 13 man-of-war ships, 8,500 infantry troops and cavalry, 5,000 Navy men. And they come down the East Coast on the way to Savannah. It was horrendous, horrible gales throughout that journey. Incredible gales. There were 5 of them, one right after the other. One of the troop ships carrying Hessian soldiers had the mast blown off, and they drifted at sea for 11 weeks before they finally got to Ireland. Can you imagine being on that ship with no food or water? But anyway, it was so bad, the gales were so bad, Bannister Tarleton, as he's coming down with his British Legion, on the ships, cargo ships, with the horses in the hold, the conditions were so bad they had to throw those horses overboard to keep from capsizing. And so now Tarleton has thrown all his horses overboard, and the artillerymen, they had to throw the artillery horses overboard. So Tarleton and his men get to Savannah, the cavalry, the British Legion, they have no horses. But February the 1st is when the British coalesce down in Savannah. And by February the 12th, now they have landed these 8,500 men on Simmons Island, which is today Seabrook Island, on the north bank of the Edisto River. They landed here totally unopposed. They landed earlier at Savannah totally unopposed. And now they're slowly working their way up through towards Charleston. February 12th there. February 24th, they establish a base at the Gibbs Plantation on the Stono River. This is the Stono River. Important, you can't get to Charleston without crossing the Stono River. So they were able to cross on February 24th. February 26th, 2 days later, they take Fort Johnson on the Charleston Harbor. Now, this is a sort of a sister fort, if you will, to Fort Moultrie over here. Fort Moultrie, they surrendered. They just abandoned that fort during this siege. This is the British Navy at the mouth of Charleston Harbor. Now, Charleston Harbor had a big sandbar that went across the harbor, the bar, crossing the bar. It's been dredged out now. But a British warship could not cross the bar loaded with its cannons. So what they had to do was a very laborious process where they take the cannons up, they put it on a smaller boat, they completely lighten the ship so now it can raise up and go across the bar. And it has to be high tide, has to be all these conditions. The wind's got to be blowing just right. So for days, the British fleet was outside the bar waiting for the chance to get into the harbor. The harbor defenses, we had our Navy in Charleston Harbor under Admiral Whipple. And 1/4 of the Continental Navy ships were here at Charleston, which is only about 5 or 6 of them. But when Fort Johnson was taken, Admiral Whipple did bombard the fort some. They killed a few folks, but it was basically ineffective. When these British warships are crossing the bar, the only armament they have is that one bow cannon right up in front. And Whipple, with his smaller ships, less cannon fire, but still, he could have come through and fired broadsides into that one ship right there. But he didn't do that. He just backed off. He didn't give them any opposition whatsoever. And once they got across the bar, then they coalesced. And you know how when the British tried this the first time, and they tried to attack the fort on Sullivan's Island, Fort Moultrie, the British anchored their ships. And that was probably the stupidest thing they did during the entire war, because now they're solitary targets. And that's why on June 28, 1776, the defenders of Fort Moultrie, with their 36 cannons, against the British Navy mounting 360 cannons, 10 times more cannons, but they got the hell blown out of them by those shots from Fort Moultrie. This time, the British didn't even pay any attention, period, to Fort Moultrie and just sailed right on past. They sailed into the harbor, and Admiral Whipple took his ships and he went up into the Cooper River. So that's March 20th. I'll show you a little bit about the configuration of the British forces at this time. This is where Clinton landed on Simmons Island with 8,000 men, and he starts coming up through this way. And he eventually gets all the way, and this is when he takes Fort Johnson right here. And this is the way he went. Now, the British Navy also brought transports up through to the Gibbs Plantation here on the Stono River, and this became a major base of operation. This shows the British fleet as they come across the bar. And once they get across the bar, once they pass Fort Moultrie, there's no opposition. Except, and Whipple and his Navy is up here on the Cooper River. You see the Cooper River here. This is the Ashley River. And if you'll notice, this north bank of the Cooper River, within a few days of what I'm describing here, this is going to be the only way in and out of Charleston on the north bank of the Cooper River. And the last Patriot reinforcements are coming down through here. I believe this is Woodford from Virginia. And those men are in Charleston for like a week before they are spending the next 2 years on the prison ships in Charleston Harbor. And that's the worst atrocity of the American Revolution. So this is where the configuration was. Now, the British have to get from here to here, but there's all these bodies of water, and there's some redoubts and artillery and observers set up, but what the British had to do was come up parallel to the Ashley River and then cross at Drayton Hall, and they crossed here on March the 26th. Now, then they were, on the mainland peninsula, and they had a straight shot down to Charleston. So, remember Tarleton. He doesn't have any horses. His mission during this whole time is to gather horses. And he goes to plantations and everything, and he gets field horses. He gets draft horses, not the kind of horses you'd want for cavalry, but at least they got 4 legs. And he's riding them and so forth. And he's coming up, and he is raiding plantations all the way through here. And on March the 27th, he comes to a plantation belonging to Charles Eliot. I believe Charles is his first name. Eliot. That's a massive, significant plantation with lots of horses and so forth. So at this point, I'm going to go over a little bit of a digression. I want y'all to know about Revolutionary War individuals, Revolutionary War heroes, the life of some of these Revolutionary War men. And one of my greatest heroes is this fellow right here. This is William Washington. George Washington's second cousin once removed. William Washington was from Augusta County, Virginia. He did not live near George Washington. They weren't really on the same social level. William Washington's great-grandfather was George Washington's grandfather. And William Washington was on the home place. Now, he was around horses his entire life. He was quite a horseman his entire life. And he was working on his father's homestead. It may have been a plantation, a small plantation, something like that. And actually, at the age of 24, William Washington began studying for the clergy. He was training with one of the local preachers there. And that's when the troubles began. The call went forward for men in Augusta County to come in and join the militia. The Augusta County militia. These were Minutemen. So William Washington and his father both joined. And very soon thereafter, William Washington was elected captain of his company. And very soon after that, the Augusta militia was taken in, drafted, conscripted, whatever you want to call it, into the Virginia Continental line. They were regulars now with the blue uniforms and so forth, and they got to be signed up for at least a year. And William Washington gradually and steadily grew through the ranks. Because of his abilities as a horseman, he was placed with the cavalry. And the cavalry during this time, during the initial stages of the war, was very different from how it was at the end of the war. Cavalrymen were primarily used as like messengers or escorts. They weren't organized into fighting units, and that didn't happen until Casimir Pulaski came along. So William Washington advanced, and he was in the cavalry. And he was involved in some of the fighting in the northern campaigns, New York in particular, and George Washington lost 4 battles in New York, and he had to haul tail as fast as he could across New Jersey. He crossed the Delaware, he got into Pennsylvania, and it's Christmas Day of 1777, I believe. And George Washington he decided a couple of days previously, but anyway, he decides he's going to attack the Hessian outpost in Trenton, New Jersey, just on the other side of the Delaware River. And I know all of y'all are familiar with that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware. It's dramatic, it's inspiring. But George Washington was not the first Washington to cross the Delaware. The first Washington to cross the Delaware was William Washington. And William Washington went across on that first transport with his men, and I believe he was with the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons. This is the corps that he commanded throughout the war. And his mission was to take a crossroads between Trenton and Princeton in case the British garrison at Princeton came to the relief of the Trenton battle, which was about to occur. So William Washington established himself right there at that crossroad, and he was watching to see what was happening where. And very soon after that, the battle broke out in downtown Trenton. And William Washington looks around, and there's no British coming from Princeton. So he's like, well, shoot, I'm not doing any good here. He rushed in to join the battle. And when he got to the battle, it was just at the time when George Washington and his men were charging right up Main Street. And at the top of the hill there, the Hessians had 2 cannons loaded with grape shot, aimed right where George Washington and his men were coming up. And that is the time when William Washington hit the Hessian line, hit the cannon emplacements, grabbed those cannons. He burned his hands doing this. Grabbed those cannons, turned them around, and shot them at the Hessians as they were scattering to the winds. So that's the kind of things that William Washington did throughout the entire Revolutionary War. And when George Washington was sending men down to relieve the South, Gates with that disaster, Nathaniel Greene, he was sending his best units to the South because he knew how important it was. And early on, during the British threat against Charleston, William Washington was sent down into South Carolina. Switching back here, Connie. So, Banastre Tarleton needs his horses. He's collecting from plantations up through here. And one of the plantations he has his eyes on is the plantation of the Elliots, Sandy Hill. Thousands of acres, good horses. And Banastre Tarleton wanted those. What I'm getting ready to talk about now is the greatest love story in South Carolina history. This is the causeway to Sandy Hill Plantation. This is Randall's Causeway. You see the marsh grass here. For the last 250 years, cedars and wax myrtle have grown up on top of the causeway. This is where the battle occurred between Banastre Tarleton, the first battle that occurred between Banastre Tarleton and William Washington. So, William Washington and his men crossed this causeway, and they found a British patrol. And they attacked that patrol, and they were successful, and they captured a leading a North Carolina loyalist militiaman named Henderson. They captured him. That was a good deal. And they also captured the surgeon for Tarleton's troops. And then they came back across the causeway, and as they were doing this, now Bannister Tarleton comes on the scene from up here, and he starts charging forward. But when he gets to where he could see the causeway and how narrow it was, only a wagon could have passed. This is one of the few times that Tarleton did not charge headlong into disaster, because it would have been disaster, because all of William Washington's men were back here. And Tarleton had turned around, he had to leave. And at this point, William Washington went to visit Sandy Hill Plantation. And there was none other there than the most eligible bachelorette in the state, which was Jane Elliott, 17 years old, the only child of her father who was very ill and soon to pass on. And this is when Jane Elliott and William Washington began their romance. They had a very brief period when they were together. At the end of this causeway on this side here is the grave of William Washington and Jane Elliott. So, one of the stories about William Washington and Jane Elliott was when Jane Elliott asked William Washington, "What flag do you serve under? Do you fight under?" And William Washington said, "Well, I have no flag." So immediately Jane Elliott got a pair of scissors, went to her fine damask draperies, and cut out a square about 18 by 18 and says, "This is your flag now." So there's lots of stories about this romance between William Washington and Jane Elliott. This was the Battle of Rantoul's Bridge here on March the 27th. But on March the 30th, this is when the British came in and had crossed onto the peninsula. And during this time, William Washington was up in this area. There are discussions that William Washington, well, he visited with her during this 3 or 4 week period before Charleston fell. I don't see any way he could possibly have been visiting with her because she was behind enemy lines at this time. And if he was sneaking out to go see his girlfriend, if one of his men had done that, they would have been tarred and feathered. There was and I've looked at the timeline here, there was no more than 36 hours that in that initial meeting with Jane Elliott and William Washington that they spent together. And it was obviously love at first sight because she gave him that flag. And the story is that he carried that flag for the rest of the war. He flew this flag in every battle he was in for the rest of the war. This is called the Utah flag. And it's very significant. And if the story is true. And if the story is true, it flew here at Hammond's Old Store. So the Utah flag is now in the possession of the Washington Light Infantry. And I had the pleasure of going to the Christmas party for the Washington Light Infantry year before last. And I was so excited, I couldn't wait to see the Utah flag. And when you look at the internet and you get pictures of the Utah flag, this is what you see. Does anybody know what that is? that is a thistle. It is a Scottish thistle. I mean, I thought it was a bug or a fish or something like that, but finally I was able to figure out it was a thistle. The Scottish thistle, the symbol of Scotland. And so I was in there talking to the Washington Light Infantry. Hey, what do y'all think about the thistle being on the flag? And they're like, what? There is no thistle on the flag. But through the power of the internet, this is what you get right now. So I made a fool out of myself talking to those fellas. I was going to tell them something they didn't know all about that thistle. This is the depiction of the Utah flag that comes from the Washington Light Infantry, but it doesn't look like this either. They wouldn't let me take a picture. There is an incredible museum there. It is moving. And the Washington Light Infantry was founded in 1807 because they thought there were additional threats from the British and so forth. And they are a military and social organization. All of their members are veterans, but I don't know exactly what the requirements are for membership beyond that. But there are a very impressive group of individuals. I will tell you right there, and these are leaders. And it's obvious by talking, and their bearing is inspiring almost. But the members of the Washington Light Infantry, were leaders in developing the Citadel, and they've been strong supporters of the military ever since. This is their depiction of the Utah flag, but it doesn't look like that either. It's just a regular square piece of fabric, and there is a fringe sleeve on the right side so that a pole would go up in front of it. So as popular as the Utah flag is, it's especially popular with artists. And this is two scenes of Hammond's Old Store right here 15 miles away. So this top depiction is by Dale Watson. This is for the South Carolina and American Battlefield Preservation Trust. This picture here, a painting, is by Jorge Rubio Perez, and it's the property of the Lawrence County Museum. This will be part of our display of the Revolutionary War Museum exhibition that the museum is going to be opening by June 28th, so that's going to be a really big deal. So, these are depictions of the Utah flag. There is not a single recorded instance of anybody mentioning anything about any flag with the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons. No pension applications, no first person, no letters, no talk of a flag bearer, none of that. However, in 1827, Jane Washington, William Washington's widow at this point, she outlived him by 20 years. She donated that flag to the Washington Light Infantry in 1827, and they had a great ceremony, and the newspaper was there and was writing all these reports, and said that she said that she had given the Utah flag to William Washington in that first encounter, 36-hour-long encounter, and he carried it with him throughout the remainder of the war. So we have her word on that. And that's almost good enough for me. Close to it anyway. I don't get too upset when I see artists showing the flag. But here's the thing. If you're in the cavalry, you got your reins in one hand and you got your sword in the other. How are you going to carry a flag in the battle? So I don't think that there was ever a a flag flown, even though the Utah flag is a very legitimate artifact. It's just a question of how much did it fly. And I will show you this. This is the home of William Washington and Jane Elliott. It's at 8 Battery Street in Charleston. So after the war, he was very successful. He was a successful horse breeder, horse raider, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what he did during the war right now. So that was the Battle of Ranthol's Bridge. Now the British are coming in. There is only one way in and out of Charleston, and that's the north bank of the Cooper River. And guarding that was the community of Monk's Corner, and there was a bridge right there, Biggin Bridge. At this point, William Washington was serving under the command of Isaac Huger, who was a continental, he was a French Huguenot, a low country planter. He was a continental general. Isaac Huger started the war as a captain in a continental regiment. He was promoted. And as he was promoted, again, this was a period of quiet. He was promoted when there weren't battles going on. He don't have a record of him, being in these battles. Now, he was at the Siege of Savannah. He was at Stono River. He was at numerous battles, but he wasn't winning. He wasn't the commanding officer in these battles. But apparently, he was a very good administrative guy. I mean, he was a very capable individual. And the only screw up he had was at Monk's Corner. And man, if he didn't screw up bad. So he was in charge at Monk's Corner. And Tarleton now has got, some pretty good horses. So the cavalry is kind of equal. And as Huger and William Washington were patrolling around, Huger camps to guard that Biggin Bridge. And there are some very specific ways that you should set up a camp. There's specific ways that you establish your order of marching, all of these factors. All of these factors come into really the ability of your munitions, your armaments to do this, that, or the other. These different types of armaments had different purposes, ways that they needed to do things. And when you lined everything up properly, it worked very well. But if you didn't line it up properly, it didn't work with the darn. So, what Huger did was he had his infantry at the bridge, and he had his cavalry out in front. And everybody knows you put the cavalry in the back and the infantry in the front. And the infantry in the front, if there's a sudden attack within a minute and a half, they can be up and ready and loaded, bayonets on, and holding off an attack. While the cavalry is finding their horse, putting a saddle on their horse, getting up on the horse, reining everything in, and getting ready to charge. You think you can do that in a minute and a half? No. That's one of the reasons why you have the cavalry in the back. Huger was not expecting Tarleton to attack during this time, and Tarleton did. Tarleton came in here and just bowled over the unprepared cavalry, and then he was in amongst the infantry, and it was just a total defeat. William Washington did get away, Isaac Huger got away, but a lot of folks did not get away. One of the folks who didn't get away was a leader of Pulaski's legion. I told you briefly about Casimir Pulaski. He is the father of American cavalry. When George Washington was at Valley Forge, Casimir Pulaski was with the cavalry in New Jersey, and he was training them how to fight as units, how to be offensive units. And the Patriots learned his lessons well, especially William Washington. But Casimir Pulaski was killed at Savannah in that bloodiest hour of the Revolution. He died by cannon fire, charging into the enemy. His second in command was a Frenchman named Vernier. And at Monk's Corner, Vernier was wounded. And he was down on his knees, and he had his hands down behind his back. And the British Legion, Tarleton's men, they had him surrounded. They were jeering him. They were pelting him. They were abusing him, molesting him. And then finally they had enough of that, and they just took a sword and they killed him right then. This is the British Legion. This is Tarleton's men. These are Americans. They are from New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, the northern states, trained in the British way, trained by Bannister Tarleton, supplied by the British, fed by the British. So they are now running rampant. Now, the British Legion was not the best sort of man that there was. These were scoundrels and cutthroats, no doubt about it. And while they were in the low country, during this time, they came upon a loyalist plantation and raped the women. And this is the only time that I've ever read the word rape in reading about the history, unless they're talking about the Cherokees. Now, it's okay if you talk about how they were raped, but they just times were different back then. They didn't talk about this. They said molested or whatever. But here, there were British legionnaires that had raped loyalist women. And Tarleton had them arrested, and they went on trial in Charleston and so forth, and they were whipped as a result of that. But what I'm conveying is the type of individuals that the British Legion are. And the Battle of Monk's Corner happened on April the 14th of 1780, and when that occurred, Charleston was cut off. There were no more supplies coming into Charleston after April the 14th of 1780. And during this time, now Clinton and Cornwallis are marching down towards the defenses of Charleston. All of this time, not a single shot was fired in opposition. The biggest obstacles that the British had during this time were, crossing the rivers and so forth. The Navy did not, they did bombard Fort Johnson for a while, but they let the British fleet come in unopposed. Lincoln says he just simply did not have enough men, and he probably didn't. I'll tell you one thing that's so bad about the fall of Charleston. George Washington knew what was important and what you could do without. And one thing George Washington realized you could do without was cities. He could do without New York. He could do without Philadelphia. But during these times, he saved his army. That was more important than the cities. And Benjamin Lincoln did not know that lesson. If Benjamin Lincoln had pulled those 5,000 men out of Charleston, let the British have Charleston, things would have been better. Who knows how it would have been, but there wouldn't have been 5,000 men captured at Charleston if Benjamin Lincoln had followed, that lesson that George Washington knew so well. And this is why it's the worst defeat in the American Revolution. Those 5,000 men were just captured. Because once the British got close enough, they started bombarding Charleston, and Charleston had to surrender due to that cannonade. But before Charleston fell, there was one more significant battle between Tarleton and Washington. And this is another case where William Washington was second in command. So here is the Santee River. It's the biggest river in South Carolina. Charlotte drains into it. Spartanburg County, the Catawba, all drain into the Santee. There was reinforcements coming down to Charleston. The last reinforcements. I told you about Woodford and his Virginians who got captured. But there was another group of Virginians coming down under the command of Abraham Buford. He had 350 men, and he had all kinds of supplies. He had shot, he had powder, he had 2 cannons. And they had made it down to the north side of the Santee, but that Santee is 200 or 300 yards wide there. There is a way to get across by a ferry, Lanou's Ferry. It's spelled Lenud, but it's pronounced Lanou. So William Washington, at this time, with the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons, was with Anthony White with the 1st Continental Light Dragoons. And Anthony White had seniority. He was in charge. So they had gone across, they were across the Santee, and they ran into one of Tarleton's group of men, and they captured 18 of them, and that was a good deal. So they took those, and they were going to bring them back, and they were going to join up with Buford on the other side of the Santee. And William Washington said, "Hey, let's go ahead and we're going to get across." And William Washington said, Anthony White said, "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll cross in the morning." And Washington was like, "That's crazy. We got to cross now." He said, No, we'll cross in the morning. So, of course, in the middle of the night, here comes Tarleton, and he crashes through, and he absolutely destroys the Patriot forces here. Poor camp security, again. All of those 18 prisoners were released. Washington and his men lost everything. They lost all their horses. William Washington swam across the Santee 300 yards while bullets were, hitting the water around him. Did he carry his sword? No, you don't swim with your sword on. He thrown that away. Would he still have the Utah flag? Maybe. I don't know. That would be the one thing you would save. So, after Lanou's Ferry, William Washington's command was absolutely destroyed. Hardly had anything left. There were some men who survived. Now they're, on foot. 30 of his men stayed with Buford and were in the next battle I'm going to talk about in a minute. William Washington went up into Virginia, into Halifax, Virginia, which is about halfway between Hillsborough and the coast. He's in Halifax. And he's there for the next 4 months, and he's raising and training another regiment along with the survivors of Lanou's Ferry. And that regiment did fantastic. So he comes back in. He wins at Rugeley's Mill on December the 4th. He gets with Greene's army. He gets with Morgan's army. He wins at Hammond's old store. He wins at Cowpens. Just heroic as can be through all of these. He's instrumental in the race to the Dan. And then at Guilford Courthouse, he's an absolute hero. Now he comes down fighting at Hobkirk's Hill, does a great job there. He's at 96, and he does superbly there, even though he wasn't totally involved at 96. Now, the British have to leave 96. They leave as refugees, and they're heading down into Charleston. Their army is in that general vicinity. Greene and Washington are in the high hills of the Santee. resting during that very hot summer. September comes, and Greene is going after the British, who were at 96. Now they're commanded by Stuart. And this is when the Battle of Eutaw Springs occurs. And at the Battle of Eutaw Springs, it went very well in so many ways for the Patriot forces. They pushed the British back. They overran the British camp. They got in the room. And they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. And during this battle, there was a staunch commander in a brick house by the name of Major John Marshbanks, who had just been in America less than 3 months. He had come over from Ireland, and he was a 35-year veteran. And he was holding the brick house at Eutaw Springs, and he was anchoring the right flank of the British line, and he could see the camp being overrun and all the drinking and everything that was going on there. And William Washington, his thing was to flank attack. And he was going to flank that British brick house and get around to the back side of them. But he couldn't do that. There was a blackjack oak thicket on that flank. And Washington could not go behind the house. So he committed the most rash act that he did during the Revolutionary War. And he charged in front of that house. And his horse was shot and fell down on top of him. And now William Washington is laying there prostrate. And a British infantryman comes up with his bayonet and stabs him right there. And he pulls it out, and he's getting ready to stab again when John Marshbanks, British hero, stops that man from killing William Washington. And William Washington is captured during this battle, and he is a prisoner. And he was seriously wounded. And he was taken into the environs of Charleston when none other than Miss Jane Elliott comes back onto the scene and nurses him back to good health. They had not seen each other for a year, other than that 36-hour interlude that they had. The name of the flag is the Utah flag. I don't know if it's associated so strongly with this Battle of Eutaw Springs. I believe it was there. She may have carried it to the battlefield at some certain point. But when William Washington came back to good health, and he and Jane Elliott were courting, they were actively walking the streets of Charleston holding hands. And the command, now later, this is in 1782, when, for all intents and purposes, the shooting has ended. But the commander of Charleston, who is Nisbet Balfour, who was at 96 for a while, he was not a very nice guy. But he allowed Jane Elliott and William Washington to get married, as William Washington was a prisoner of war. And they did indeed live happily ever after. So that's how we tie in what happened with the fall of Charleston. You know, it was an absolute bombardment. And when the British started firing flaming red-hot cannonballs into the city and the houses started catching on fire, Benjamin Lincoln knew that the gig was up and he had to surrender. But there's one other battle that I do associate with the fall of Charleston, even though this happened 2 weeks afterwards. And it's because it does involve Banastre Tarleton, and it involves Abraham Buford. So after Charleston fell, you know, Buford was retreating, and he was going up eventually to Salisbury, North Carolina. And the way you do that, you take the Great Wagon Road. It goes through Camden, and 20 or 30 miles on the other side of Camden, almost right at the North Carolina and South Carolina line in the Waxhaws community. That is where Abraham Buford was retreating. And he was 80 miles from Charleston during this time. The British thought that the South Carolina governor, John Rutledge, was traveling with Buford. And so they gave orders to Tarleton to capture Buford and hopefully Governor Rutledge. So Tarleton took off. He covered 80 miles in 2 days and caught up with Buford. And Buford knew he was coming. They were sending notes back and forth to each other. You need to surrender, and I'll never surrender, all this kind of stuff. So Buford knew Tarleton was coming. Now, Abraham Buford, this was the first combat he had ever seen. It was the last combat he had ever seen. He did not set up his troops in a very intelligent manner. I told you he had 2 cannons. He did. And he had them way back in the back. He wanted to protect his cannons or something. If he had these cannons up here, even Tarleton, as he charged, would not charge into grape shot. So that was kind of the first mistake he made. The second was he lined his 350 men up just like this in a straight line. Straight line. And he could see Tarleton coming in the distance. And he gives the order, hold your fire, do not shoot until they are 10 yards away. So that was the order. Tarleton comes up in column formation. He enfilades into en echelon, into line formation, and he's charging into these men here. Now, during this time, Tarleton was actually over here on the left flank, and he was leading. He wanted to flank Buford's men. So here comes Tarleton's men charging away, full speed, right into the teeth of those Continental soldiers that are holding their fire until 10 yards away. And when those charging horses come, then there is an incredible blast. And that volley is discharged. And there's smoke everywhere, and you can't see a thing. And those horses are continuing at full gallop right through the line, whether they've got a dead soldier on them or not. They're going right through the line, whether the horse is dead or not. It's bowling these guys over as they come. Waiting till charging cavalry was 10 yards ahead before you fired is the dumbest thing you could have possibly done. And that's what Buford did. With that blast, Tarleton's horse is killed and falls on top of him. Tarleton spent the battle of the Waxhaws pinned underneath his horse. So there are numerous stories about what happened during this time and about the massacres and so forth that occurred afterwards. We know the reputation of the British Legion. I mean, these guys were asses. They really were. So we knew they were bad guys. The first written, probably word of mouth messages about a massacre just immediately started going, but the first written reaction we have of a massacre as it occurred comes from Abraham Buford, who wrote his report 4 days after the battle, and he did not see the battle. He was in the back during this whole time. And then he ran away, and he was censured over that. He never took command again. So then there's other reports from 30 and 40 years later about the activities that happened. Was a white flag raised? When was a white flag raised? I'm pretty sure there was a white flag raised. But as there was a white flag being raised, there was a battle continuing to go on over here with infantry. Charleston was not given orders. He was pinned underneath his horse. One report says that a white flag was given to Charleston's second in command, and that fella, I don't think I wrote his name down, Cochrane, he said, I can't accept that. You have to give that to Commander Charleston. Where is he? I think he's over there somewhere. So was that a white flag or not? It's hard to say. Jim Pikich, a noted author from Camden, has written a book, Let the Blood Be Upon Your Head, which is what Charleston said to Buford if he did not surrender. Let the blood be upon your head. Jim analyzed the battles, the different reports, the reports from 40 and 30 and 40 years later and these sorts of things. And he came up with a figure of 5 men were killed after the white flag was raised. Tarleton's Quarter. This is, what was a rallying cry for the Patriot forces throughout, and particularly at Kings Mountain. So, you paint your enemy in the most grotesque terms possible. And that is one thing that did give inspiration to the Patriot forces after Charleston had fallen. Now, this was 2 weeks before. That was a terrible occurrence. Now we've really got something to fight for, because if we don't fight to the end, we are going to get Tarleton's Quarter just as well. And it raised the emotions of the South Carolina Continentals and militia. The Battle of the Waxhaws raised emotions, and it was effective in that regard. So that's basically the stories with the fall of Charleston. That's the story with William Washington. I hope y'all never forget that guy. Hope you never forget Stephen Cumbo, who fought with William Washington here at Hammond's Old Store, if he was Samuel Hammond's independent regiment, which I'm sure he was. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. Yes, the question is, what was life like during the occupation of Charleston by the British? Right. Well, now, life in the city was a little different from the Continental soldiers. So I mentioned that there were 5,000 men who were captured at Charleston. And on June the 1st, Henry Clinton left a proclamation to the militia, to the backcountry, soldiers and everything, homesteaders. He said, if you lay down your arms and go to your house, don't pick up your arms again, we will treat you as a neutral. But the Continental soldiers, the regulars, they were all imprisoned in 3 prison ships in Charleston Harbor. And the most notorious of those prison ships was the Pack Horse that was designed to carry 300 men or so. It had over 1,100 men in there. And there were 2 others as well. There were also prison ships in New York Harbor. And what I did mention before was that the greatest atrocities of the Revolutionary War, and believe me, there were a lot of atrocities. The greatest one was those prison ships. That was unbearable. Yes. Yes. Yes, he asked about Admiral Whipple's Navy, what happened to them, and those ships were scuttled. Yep, they sure were. They just totally useless during that siege. We lost 1/4 of our Navy over that. Well, if there are no other questions, I appreciate y'all's attention and your interest, and everybody out there in YouTube land as well. Thank you.